Okay, we're starting part 2 of the series of Halachas Hilchas Pesach, and the shir is dedicated to Nishmas Reb Shlomo Avram ben Michal HaKohen Alav Shalom and Shabifim for Aliyas HaNashama. So the first shir focused on what we call the Sur Mira, abstaining from the negative, all about kashering, cleaning, bir chametz, bedikas chametz, reifas chametz, a lot of stuff we went through over there. We're not going to repeat everything, and I would recommend people to go listen to the first shir if you think that we missed out some details that might have been covered in the first shir. We are now up to the stage of Erev Pesach, and we're going to focus more on how Erev Pesach prepares for Pesach, for the Seder, rather than the stuff about Bedikas Chametz and Bir Chametz and Sreifas Chametz. Well, the Sreifas Chametz and Bittul Chametz is done on Erev Pesach. Erev Pesach is a very special day, aside from the fact that it's the birthday of the Rambam. The Rambam was born on Erev Pesach, which that year was a Shabbos. And we're actually told, unusually, we're told about the Rambam exactly when he was born. He was born an hour and a third after midday. And as the Rebbe told us so much about the uniqueness of learning Rambam, so today that we celebrate the Rambam with all the other stuff that we're doing on Erev Pesach, we acknowledge that it's the birthday of the Rambam. The Shalar writes that on Erev Pesach, one should fulfill the idea of Shivisi Hashem Lenegdi Summit. We always have to be focused that Hashem's in front of us. All day long on Erev Pesach, we're serving the Eibishter. We, out of love and out of fear, there's so much that we're doing in Erev Pesach in preparation for Pesach. Rebbe Kiva Eger writes a letter that when Yidden had a Beis Hamikdash, we had a Yom Tov, which was a very joyful Yom Tov, a Shechting of Pesach, and during the Shchitas HaPesach, we used to say Hal. Unfortunately, nowadays, we don't have a Beis Hamikdash, but we make a commemoration for what they did when there was a Beis Hamikdash, and Mitzvah, hopefully this year we'll have the Beis Hamikdash back. We show the Kedusha of this day. We are very involved in the mitzvahs of the day as Bir and Bittul Chametz, and preparing for the Seder. And according to Allah, after midday, actually, Al Pi Allah, you're not allowed to do work because it's a semi-Yom Tov, so we have to be focused on this Yom Tov aspect. The Friediger Rebbe writes on Lubavitch on Erev Pesach, the same day, there were 2 days in the year that the same day was split in middle, that there was such a marked difference between the attitude I'm feeling the first half of the day to the second half of the day. Erev Yom Kippur and Erev Pesach, and the same day, the mood has changed completely. Midday made such a separation, midday, Erev Pesach, that you felt as if it's 2 times of the year. One of the things we saw our Rebbe, that he would give out matzahs on Erev Pesach after Mincha. The Rebbe would wear zaydens, he would wear his silk Shabbos Yantav clothing, wear a gartel, and indeed many have the meaning that they wear already Shabbos and Yantav clothing after midday. Midday Erev Pesach over here in New York is 12:59, a minute to 1. And one of the practical halachas, as mentioned a minute ago, is the idea that you're not allowed to do malacha. When there was a Beis Hamikdash, it was forbidden to do malacha after midday because it's a time of bringing the carbon Pesach. And when you bring a carbon, it is forbidden to do malacha. Even when we don't have a Beis Hamikdash, unfortunately, we don't have a carbon Pesach, the Isser of Malacha did not change. It is forbidden to do work. If someone does work at a Pesach after midday, he should be excommunicated, Chazal tell us, like someone who violates what Chazal say. He will not see a sign of blessing from that work forever. Whether he's working for money or even for free, for himself, for others, for Yom Tov, it's forbidden. What is the criteria of work? Whatever you're allowed to do on Chol Hamoed, you're allowed to do Erev Pesach. You're certainly allowed to do Erev Pesach after midday. So something which is unfortunately going to get ruined, we call it a davar of it if you don't do it. Something which is an unprofessional activity and is needed for Yom Tov is allowed to be done. Only regular, full-fledged work, making new utensils, sewing new clothing, washing clothing, that may not be done. But an old garment that was a bit ruined and you need it for Yom Tov, it was ripped a bit, and you need to sew it, that's fine, even if it's professional. Writing Sfarim, for example, is considered a malacha. So really, even if it's done for a mitzvah, it shouldn't be permissible. It's only permissible the way it's done a Chol Hamoed, which the criteria how you're allowed to write Sfarim Chol Hamoed, I'm not going to go through all the halachas of Chol Hamoed. If a person is learning and he's writing as he's learning, that's not called proper writing. That's perfectly fine. Writing letters is fine. Haircuts. You're not allowed to give a haircut to another Jew from midday onwards. You're not allowed to give a haircut to yourself. You're allowed to have a guy give you a haircut, or all other malachas with the minigas on Erev Pesach, even if it's not for Yom Tov, if it's done through a guy, then it's fine. Cutting nails. There's a machlikas if you're allowed to cut nails after midday or not. The Alter Rebbe says that you could rely on those that say that you're allowed to cut nails when it comes to Erev Pesach. Chol Hamoed were much more machmir. But Erev Pesach, lechatchili, you should try to be stringent and try to cut your nails before midday. But if you forgot and you didn't cut your nails before midday, you could be lenient and cut them after midday. Business should not be done, although strictly speaking, business is not called malacha, but the meaning is to forbid to do business at a Pesach after midday. This is all after midday. Prior to midday, there were different minhagim. Some had the custom that even prior to midday they didn't work, and some had a custom they did the work. Nowadays, the minig is that people do work before midday, and as the poskim say, halavai, if only people would keep the halacha of not to do work after midday. We're not going to tell them about a minig before midday. That's not the established minig today. Because it's a Yom Tov, and it's associated with the Kedusha of the Carbon Pesach, people should really primarily be involved in matters of the Yom Tov. It's time to go take a bath, take a shower, go to the mikveh, and be involved in the simcha of the Yom Tov and the simcha of the Eidishtat of love and appreciation of the Yom Tov that's coming to us. There's a special halacha, nothing to do with work, on every Erev Yom Tov, not only Erev Pesach. It's actually primarily about Erev Shavuos. It says that Erev Shavuos, if somebody does bloodletting, which is, we used to do that in the olden days, bloodletting, it was a type of cure to release blood as a cure. Bloodletting in Erev Shavuos is a sakana, is a danger. Now, because it's a sakana in Erev Shavuos, they made a rule they shouldn't do bloodletting any Erev Yom Tov, not to confuse things. There's a question if today's forms of blood tests are all considered bloodletting. One should definitely not schedule to begin with a blood donation or a blood test for Erev Pesach, because it might be considered the same as bloodletting. There was no reason dafka to do it on Erev Pesach. Sometimes if it's sakana and you have to do it, then of course you have to do it then. So we start preparing for the Seder and for the Shulchan Aruch for the meal on Erev Pesach. And there's things we should remember in terms of our preparations on Erev Pesach. First, you're supposed to have your table all set. So when immediately it becomes night, you can start a Seder right away. You don't have to have extra time to start setting the table. And all the things that you need for the Seder, such as matzahs and wine, make sure the bottles are already open. All the things you're going to have on the kaida, roasting the zraya, checking the lettuce. We dry our lettuce also because we're worried that by koirach we're going to put the lettuce onto the matzah will get wet. Grating the charain, the horseradish, preparing the charoisas. In charoisas, officially in charoisas is supposed to be apples, pears, nuts, ginger, and cinnamon. Our minig is the Rebbe writes for many years already became the minig that we don't do ginger and cinnamon. And it's same for Hagim. It says rak tapuchim agasim ve'egoizim, only apples, pears, and nuts. There's a story that Rebbetzin Rivka in Lubavitch told the Bachram that we don't put only apples and nuts. It doesn't even mention pears. People say that the Rebbe's Charois also was no pears, but I can't tell you, and I don't know if that was based on the people in the kitchen. But in Sefer HaMenagim it says our meaning is apples, pears, and nuts. Only those three items is what we put, and those things we have to be crushed and prepared before the Seder. Now, the problem is some of these things, if you're going to be doing them on Pesach proper, when it comes by night, it could be halachic problems. Checking lettuce could be a question of there's bugs in it. It could be a question of natilas neshama, the bugs, killing the bugs. It could be questions of muktzah, of bayr, of schita. So the right thing is to check it when it's still daytime. It's also easier with sunlight. It's easier to go and check your lettuce. By night, also in a rush, you won't be able to do things properly. So do your lettuce Erev Pesach. You're not supposed to soak lettuce in water for more than 24 hours because the halach is if something is soaked in water is considered cooked, and you can't be yotze with murr that's cooked. So if you're going to be starting an early start, then don't do it for 24 hours. The matzah should be checked out of Pesach. Make sure there's no kfules in the fuchais, doubled up matzahs that are blown up in certain areas. It says in halacha that we have a minig that if we find kfules and the fuchais in our matzah, we burn them. If it's Shabbos v'yantiv, we cover it with something. We're not machmer after Pesach for those doubled up matzahs. We allow us to eat it, but during Pesach, we're particular. Now, our matzahs are very, very thin. It's hardly unlikely to find what we call in the fuch where it's blown up. Even a kfula, a lot of people are lenient in our matzahs. Generally, the folds that we have in our matzahs usually are not really called a proper kfula. If people are machmer, they're machmer only in the place of the fold, they're not machmer all the matzah around it. That should be a problem. Kfula means where it's doubled means where there's two sides touching each other, stuck to each other, mamish laying each other, where there's no ear space in between. That's called a kfula, and we're worried that it didn't bake properly. It could be a question of chametz. So some people in the matzah bakers, they often check these things, but sometimes they miss it, and some matzah bakers unfortunately don't check it. So all these things should be checked in advance. People didn't separate challah from the matzahs. It should be separated before Yom Tov. The one thing that we don't do when it's still daytime is it is our custom, it's narizal and other reasons, that the kaira, setting up the Seder plate, that we do at night right before Kiddush. The zroya is supposed to be roasted. Now the carbon Pesach was roasted, and to commemorate the carbon Pesach was supposed to roast our zroya. The problem is the carbon Pesach, if it touched metal, became unkosher. When you put it on the oven and you roast it there, it might touch metal. So if you want to roast it on your oven, try to make sure that it doesn't touch the metal. Try not to use a metal tongue, a metal fork. A lot of people are not particular about this. There's a lot of reasons why it's okay. It's okay to be lenient. If somebody could be machmer, that's great. And there's a discussion in Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch about this. But the common custom is a lot of people don't even roast their zraya. They just cook the zraya. Some people first cook it and then roast it. Some people roast it and then cook it. But follow your family custom. If you forgot to prepare any of these things before the Seder, then it could become a problem the night of the Seder, how to prepare them. We'll get to that in a moment. But before we get to that, there's one of the things that we eat by the Seder is meat. Shulchan Aruch, mitzvah yom to eat meat. But the meaning is not to eat roasted meat, whether it's animal meat or chicken meat. It makes no difference. Fish you could roast, eggs you could roast. Anything that needs to be shechted, the meaning is that we don't roast, so it shouldn't commemorate the carbon Pesach. Roasting, pot roasting. Pot roasting in halacha means that you roast something in a pot without any liquid, but it cooks in its own juice. So it's actually technically not roasting, it's cooking, but it's cooking in its own juice. So that's not exactly similar to the carbon Pesach, but it is an issue of manas ayin. People might get confused and they might allow fire roasting because they see you roasting what we call pot roasting. And even if you put a tiny bit of oil, but it's a drop of oil where it's just that it shouldn't burn, that also one should be stringent, treated like pot roasting. Even if you cooked it first in water and the meat that you're eating for the seder, I'm not talking about the zray right now. If you cooked it first in water and then you roasted it in a pot, you also should be stringent. If you roasted it and then you cooked it, the cooking undoes the roasting, that you can eat by the seder. That's not a problem. Going through one of the other things for the seder, not only is there's food, there's also dishes that we use. All dishes that were not toivel should be toivel. Make sure you toivel them. It's a problem to toivel something on Yom Tov. When you toivel on Yom Tov, it's considered mesakin. It's considered as if you're fixing it. So what do you do if you forgot to toivel before Yom Tov? You have a becher that has to be used. Well, if you have another becher, that would be best. If you don't have anything else, if it's an item that you could use to fill up water from the mikveh with it, so don't toivel it. Fill up water from the mikveh. And then it's okay. It got naturally toiveled. You don't make a brach on this tefillah. You make it's like a trick. I'm just filling up water with it. But that's provided you plan to use this water on Yom Tov. Now, I don't know if you're going to want to drink the water from the mikveh, but you're going to want to use this water to rinse for rinsing. That's fine. If you're not planning to use the water on Yom Tov, so then you can't do that. You can't take your becher and fill up your kiddush cup and fill up water from the mikveh and say, no, I'm just filling up a cup of water. Clearly, you're toiveling it, and toiveling is considered fixing a vessel, and you can't immerse in the mikveh. What you could do is you can give it to a guy as a present, and then tell the guy you want to borrow it from him. So now it's not considered your utensil. It belongs to a non-Jew, and therefore it doesn't have to be toiveled. This is a short-term solution that doesn't work long-term. It works for Yom Tov because you can't immerse dishes on Yom Tov. After Yom Tov, you're going to have to go again and toivel it anyhow. You just won't make a brach on it. Glass is more lenient. Glass doesn't have to be toiveled in HaTorah only rabbinically. And therefore, if a person didn't have a chance to toivel before Yom Tov, glass is allowed to be toiveled on Yom Tov, not on Shabbos. Yom Tov is more lenient because its requirement of toiveling is only rabbinic. Therefore, it's not considered really fixing it. So for Yom Tov, we're lenient. We allow you to toivel glass on Yom Tov. So that's for those who forgot and didn't toivel before. The right way is not to forget and do things on time. Also, before Yom Tov, remember all the packaging of the new clothing. Take off the labels that it has, where it says who sold it, the cleaners labels. There's knots in the pockets. Check your tzitzis, tie up the tzitzis. But everything should be done properly and all prepared before Yom Tov. Cut your plastic tablecloths. Those who are using plastic covers, make sure it's all cut before Yom Tov. You're not allowed to actually cut those on Yom Tov. It's actually absolutely forbidden. And when you're on Erev Yom Tov, while you're remembering all about preparing for your beautiful Seder, don't forget that the Rambam tells us that when you're eating and drinking and being merry on Yom Tov, you should feed the orphans, the widows, the gay, the convert, all the poor people, people that don't have other people that can help them out. Those that sit in their home, they lock their doors, and they eat and drink themselves with their family, and they don't give to the poor and to the bitter people. That's not called a simcha mitzvah. That's called, the Rambam says, it's a simcha stomach. that's an embarrassment. It's not a simcha. So we've been thinking about ourselves. For Yom Tov, remember there's other people too that are needy and need your help. One of the things that are very relevant this year on that of Yom Tov is Erev Tavshilin. Whenever Yom Tov falls out on a Thursday or on a Friday, or on a Friday and a Shabbos, in order to allow us to cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos, you can't cook on Shabbos. But you're not allowed to cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos either. So how do you get your food ready for Shabbos? So whenever Yom Tov is Thursday or Friday and Shabbos, you're supposed to go and Erev Yom Tov and take bread, or matzah in this case, and a cooked food, and do what we call the Erev Tavshilin, which will allow you to cook for Shabbos. So first, you take this matzah, kosher Pesach matzah, and the food, and you put it in your right hand. We're going to be seeing soon. You're supposed to give it to someone else to pick up on behalf of the community. You give it to his right hand, and then you take it back from him with your right hand, unless you're left-handed, and all this changes. You do this on Erev Yom Tov. You should not be doing it the night before Erev Yom Tov. Erev Yom Tov proper, that means Wednesday daytime, not Tuesday night. You take, we said, bread and a cooked food. Bread in this case means matzah, and a cooked food. The most important thing is the cooked food, not the matzah. The matzah is the secondary part. The matzah is for people that want to bake on Yom Tov. But who's baking challah? Nobody's baking. And matzah, nobody's baking on Yom Tov. But even if you're not baking on Yom Tov, you might want to heat something up. You might want to make a kugel. Again, this won't be relevant for Pesach, but it'll be more relevant for other Yom Tovim. So we take that. We take the matzah and the cooked food, regardless if you're going to be baking or not baking. And the cooked food has to be something that you can eat together with bread or together with matzah. In theory, I know we don't eat anything without matzah, but in theory, it could be eaten with matzah. Something that people would never eat with bread, for example, rice. I'm giving non-Pesach examples, but rice, couscous, potatoes, dry potatoes, these things are not eaten with bread. You can't use them as a cooked food for an Erev. If there's a food that in certain places they do eat it with bread, but where you live, it's not a thing that people eat with bread. It's not kosher for Erev. If you made it Shil, it actually isn't invalid. It has to be a cooked food, not something raw, which was actually cooked, that could be eaten with matzah with bread. People usually take an egg. And the reason why people take an egg, the Alter Rebbe mentions to take meat or fish. The reason why people take an egg, because eggs don't get ruined. Nowadays, the way we have fridges, it's easy to take meat or fish, which is a more chashuv kind of food. There is an advantage of an egg. We mentioned the advantage of it doesn't get ruined, but there's another advantage of people usually, it's easy to cook, and people usually cook it on Erev Yom Tov. They're cooking it for Shabbos. They're cooking it specifically for the Erev Tavshilin. So there's an advantage of that. But Alter Rebbe mentions meat or fish, so there's definitely an advantage in doing that. The meat or fish should be the size, or egg should be the size of a kazayas, the size of approximately half an egg, a third of an egg, and the matzah should be the size of an egg. This is the volume. You give it to someone else. You don't hold it with him. You give it into his hand. Ideally, someone who is not a member of your family, even though the person might be eating by you. You could use your adult son if he's married. If you don't have anybody else, you could even use your wife and your kids or your adult sons that are eating your food, that are not married. And the reason you give it to someone else is they should pick it up on behalf of the whole community. You say a phrase, this should be for the benefit of the rest of the community. The minig is that whenever we make an Erev Tashil, we include other members of the community, even though might not be necessary. There's other people that are doing that. This is purely in obviously Israel. Of course, if you're in a place where there's nobody else, you don't need to have this aspect of doing it with another person. That's because you want to help out other people in the community who might have forgotten Erev Tashilin, and if for something they can rely on the rabbi in the community, and everybody acts like a rabbi and they're doing mitzvahs and doing it for everybody else. The person who you're giving to should pick it up, lift it up one tefach, then you take it back from him, and then you make a bracha. And the bracha is a bracha on Asher Kachad Masay Svan on Mitzvahs Erev. And then you say a phrase in Aramaic, B'dein Yehei Shara, by doing this, should be permitted for us to bake, to cook, to light candles, and do everything we need from Yom Tov to Shabbos for us and the whole entire people in the city. You're supposed to say that phrase in a language you understand. If you don't understand Aramaic, it's pointless to say it in Aramaic. If you do understand, you can perfectly say it in Aramaic like it's in the Siddur. Now, if you didn't make a bracha, as long as you didn't eat yet the cooked food, you could still make. Don't eat up the cooked food and say I didn't make a bracha. It's over. No, you didn't eat yet the cooked food. You could still make an Erev with a bracha. As long as you remember before Yom Tov came in, you could take a bracha, take the food, and make a bracha on it. If you didn't say the words, you said the bracha, you didn't say the words, B'dein Yehei Yishar Allah, what this will be permitted for us. If you remembered before Yom Tov came in, take it again in your hand. If you didn't make a bracha, you make a bracha with it and say the words B'dein, etc. If you already make a bracha, just say the words B'dein, and so on. But you don't make the bracha again. If a person remembered after Yom Tov came in, we should be stringent and treat it. If you didn't say those words, that this will be permitted, treat as if you didn't make an Erev Tashilin. There are desperate situations. There could be certain leniencies, but generally we should be machmer. We are machmer. If somebody did those, it's very crucial to say the words, not only the bracha, but the words b'dein yehei sharalada. It's not just picking up food. It's saying something with it, that this food should help you, allow you to cook. Now, this food, you have to have the food and the matzah until after you finish preparing all your Shabbos food. Once you prepared everything you need for Shabbos, you did all the needs of Shabbos, now it could be technically eaten. And the meaning is not to eat it, but technically it could be eaten, and if you should put away the egg, the meat, the fish, whatever you're using, and the matzah, put it in a place that people are not going to eat it. Best to have a bag which is marked, put the food in a fridge, because it shouldn't get ruined. If it's ruined, that it's inedible, and it's still out of Yom Tov, and it already got ruined, then you can make an Erev Tashilin again with a bracha. A person who forgets to make an Erev Tashilin, sometimes you can rely on the rabbi's Erev, sometimes the fact that you forgot is considered negligence, and someone who's negligent cannot rely on the rabbi's Erev. Therefore, if you forgot, you have to ask a Rav if you can rely on the rabbi's Erev or not. Because of this issue of Erev Tashilin, because of the common mistakes that people forget, it's a very good idea, it's recommended to send notices on the phone, text, email, social media. There are people that are forgetting. It's a very good idea. You shouldn't worry about the fact that you got 20 reminders of Erev Tashilin. It's better to have 20 reminders than forgetting altogether not being able to cook for Yom Tov to Shabbos. If someone didn't make an Erev Tashilin, there might be solutions how to cook without an Erev Tashilin. Whether relying on the Rav, there might be other solutions. Not of all those methods help. Some of them don't help for lighting candles, especially nowadays that we don't really need candles, we have electricity. So all of this should be discussed with a Rav. Even someone who's not planning to cook anything from Yom Tov to Shabbos, but they're going to be lighting candles. You're going to be lighting candles at a Shabbos on Yom Tov for Shabbos. For that itself, you need an Erev Tashil and you make a bracha on it. Even so, if you will not make a bracha, you will not be able to light candles on Yom Tov for Shabbos. If you're not doing any melacha from Yom Tov to Shabbos, then you're not making Erev Tashil. But if you're staying by other people, that's a whole different halacha. We'll get to that in a moment. So let's talk about this idea of Erev Tashil in terms of the owner of the house and all the other people. Anybody who's in the house is a member of the family. People in the house who are eating your food, they could do your Erev, the Erev Tashil of the balabais, of the owner, works for everybody else because everybody's secondary to the balabais. They all eating the same food. So the Erev Tashil made by the balabais, by the owner, covers the rest of the family. A family member who's not eating your food and he gets raw food, then he cooks it himself. In fact, they would need to have their own Erev Tashil and not considered secondary. So that's interesting. People have for whatever health reasons, they make their own food. But they're not eating the food that's made in the house. They would need their own Erev Tashil. Guest that are staying by some for Yom Tov. So if you're really mamish staying and eating by them everything, then you're like a member of the family. And you could be yotze with the same Erev Tashil. The fact that we make Erev Tashil for other people are other people in the city that are not eating our food. But the problem is it's not so clear. If you're eating by them only Shabbos, only Yom Tov, why would that work? Seemingly, you would have to be eating by them already Erev Yom Tov. And because this is not so clear, it's always best to ask the balabais, be my shlich, I'm making the Erev Tashilin for me. In fact, the Erev Tashilin, the balabais could take the Erev Tashilin, give it for that person to pick up, and he will be included in the Erev Tashilin as well. If a person eats in a family but doesn't sleep there, that's fine. If you're eating, then you're staying. You're a resident there. You're there for Erev Yom Tov, and if you're there for Yom Tov, you're there for Shabbos. You just don't sleep there. That should be fine. If somebody wants to be machmer, no problem. You can ask the balabas to make for you and be mezaki. You should be included in this Erev Tashilin, but you really wouldn't have to do that. If you made it Erev Tashilin, and then a guest came over, and the guest says, "Oh, let me take your matzah." No, you can't do that. If he comes over to your house afterwards, he wasn't part of the Erev Tashilin, he has to go and now make his own Erev Tashilin with his own food. Whenever you make an Erev Tashilin, it allows you to cook from Friday to Shabbos. It doesn't allow you to cook from Thursday for Shabbos. It also doesn't allow you to cook from one day Yom Tov to the next day Yom Tov. Like every Yom Tov, you're not allowed to cook from one day Yom Tov to the next day Yom Tov. There's another mitzvah that we do. Some people do it at every Erev Shabbos. Some people do it at Erev Sukkah. Some people do it at Erev Pesach. The common custom is to do it every Erev Pesach for those that this is relevant for them. And that's Erev Chatzeris. If people need to carry between one yard and another, we'll talk about it in a moment, the details, make an Erev Chatzeris and then make a bracha. You make a bracha on Erev Tavshilin and you make a bracha on Erev Chatzeris. It's the same exact bracha. Some people suggest to make one bracha for both, and it's a question how to make one bracha for two things together and how you're going to say it. But the minig is, like it says in Sefer Maharil, which is an early Pesach, and a lot of people didn't see what he wrote. He writes clearly you should make a separate bracha once al mitzvah, like it says in the Siddur, once on Erev Tavshilin, a separate bracha al mitzvah seidev, and another bracha al mitzvah seidev for Erev Chatzeris. What is Erev Chatzeris? Whenever there's two houses sharing an area, sharing a yard, sharing a hallway, so you're not allowed to carry from your house into the yard because that's like carrying from a private domain into a public domain. You can't carry from one house to another, even if you're not going to go through the yard. Chazal allowed you to do this if you're going to make an Erev Chatzeris. So what we do is on Erev Pesach, which is the best time to do it for the whole year, we take one matzah, and we do that for all the Shabbos of the year. We only make an Erev Chatzeris on Erev Pesach if there's two houses that these two houses cannot use this Erev Tashil, and you can carry from one to another. There's a window where the two houses can carry from one to another, or the door. That's where you can make an Erev Tashil. Erev Chatzeris. Erev Chatzeris only works if the area is surrounded with proper walls. You can't, if it's a place that you're not allowed to carry to begin with, of course, Erev Chatzeris doesn't work. If there's a non-Jew living there, someone who's Machal Shabbos Farhesia, someone who doesn't believe in the rabbi's rules of Erev, etc., then there's a special halacha. You don't make an Erev Chatzeris for that person. You need to rent the area from him. There's a special halacha of Schiris or Shus, and you should talk to a Rav and find out how to do this. When we make the bracha on the bracha of Erev Tashilin, again, I'm confusing the two. I'm saying Erev Tashilin, I mean Erev Chatzeris. We make a bracha, and again, we say a special phrase, B'dei Heishad Alana, that with this Erev that I'm making, I'll be allowed to carry, bring in, bring out, carry from one area to the other area. If you don't stand Aramaic, say in whatever language you understand. You say this before you give it to someone to pick up on behalf of all the people who live in the apartment building in the yard. You always make a bracha before you do the action. So in this case, you're going to hold this food, this matzah. In this case, it's only matzah, and you're going to give it to someone else to lift up. In this case, you have to give it to someone to lift up. It's not like Erev Tavshil that you don't need to do that. It's a nice thing to be mezakeh the whole community. The idea of Erev Chatzeris is that this matzah is going to belong to everybody who lives in this apartment building, in this shared yard. So before you give it to another person to pick up, you make a bracha, and then you give it to someone else to pick up. If you already gave it to the other person to pick up on behalf of everyone, it's still, so long Shabbos didn't come in, it's the Erev works the minute Friday night, the minute Shabbos comes in. So long Shabbos didn't come in, you could still make the bracha. How do you do the Erev Chatzeris? Someone in the area that lives there takes a matzah that belongs to him, and he makes his matzah belong to anybody that lives in this, that owns this, every household that owns the shared yard, that has the rights to use the shared yard. If it's more than 18 houses, then you're supposed to, like this, only a third of it, a matzah, the volume of a third of an egg is fine. If there's more than 18 households, then you're supposed to have enough, that's a matzah that's enough for 2 meals, which is 18 thirds of an egg, which is 6 eggs. If you want to talk in practical terms in handmade matzah is very, very different one from another, and it's also not in the same matzah itself. There's a difference between the center and the rest of the matzah. So I'm going to give it an average, but the word average is a totally incorrect word to use. I'm going to use it anyhow because I have nothing else to use. It's an average of about 3 matzahs. And you're giving this person is going to pick it up, everybody that lives in this apartment building, for example, and it belongs to them. They don't have to be there. You have someone else pick it up on behalf of everyone. The person should be an adult, should not be your children. That person picks it up at tefach. It's as if everybody lifted it up, and he's picking it up for all the people that share this apartment building or share this yard, and anybody that's later going to move in as well. So that's part of the Erev Chatzeris. It's important for people that want to carry throughout the year in the shared properties. Best time you do that at Pesach, then you can use a matzah. Matzah stays good for the whole year, and that's fine. Let's move on. Talking about preparation for Yom Tov, Chazal tell us, Chayiv l'tayr adam l'tayr atzmei beregel, a person is supposed to go and purify himself before Yom Tov, which is going to a mikveh, night of Yom Tov. Men go to the mikveh, and when they go to the mikveh, they immerse, they have a mind that should be for Yom Tov, and to take upon themselves the kedusha of Yom Tov with a lot of simcha, tuv levav, the holiness of Yom Tov. Even someone that doesn't go to mikveh every single Friday should still go to mikveh for Erev Yom Tov. It's not only the actual going to the mikveh, it's the spiritual purity. The Friedrich Rebbe once said, preparing for Yom Tov l'tayr atzmei means having new clothing. It means preparing your faculties of the soul. It means purifying your thought, your speech and action. So that's all, of course, included. On that of Pesach, late in the day, when it comes to 10th halachic hour on the day over here in New York, it's approximately 10 after 4. There's halachas about eating from that stage onwards in order that you should be able to eat the matzah with appetite. In the previous class, we spoke about certain foods you're not supposed to eat already from Erev Pesach in the morning. But now I'm talking about a special halacha about from the 10th hour, about 10 after 4. For us, this is not relevant about eating egg matzah, because we don't eat that at all. We treat it like chametz. So from the time we now eat chametz in the morning, we don't eat that anymore. But for us, I mean for Ashkenazim. But even other foods, fruits, vegetables, meat, fish, you're supposed to eat only a little bit. Don't fill up your stomach with it. Don't drink wine. You're not supposed to drink from that time onwards. Mincha Erev Pesach. The Rebbe Rashab will daven an early mincha. Generally, it's b'chlal a good idea to daven early mincha on Erev Pesach, because after Erev Pesach, after mincha, we say the Seder Karban Pesach, which is about bringing the Karban Pesach, which is supposed to be before sunset. You can't bring a Karban after sunset. Sunset is about 20 after 7 over here. Because mincha corresponds to the afternoon Karban in the Beis HaMikdash, afternoon Karban Tamid, when we daven it's instead of a Karban. When there was a Beis HaMikdash after the Karban Tamid, there would be a Karban Pesach. So after mincha, we're supposed to talk about the Seder Karban Pesach. The Rebbe Rashab would go and learn in depth the Seder Karban Pesach and the general halachas of Karban Pesach. The Friedrich Rebbe relates this, and he did the same. The Rebbe once spoke, was after davening one day on Pesach, he was in the Friedrich Rebbe's room, and the Rebbe said, one time I came in to my father-in-law, to the Rebbe, the Friedrich Rebbe, Erev Pesach after Mincha, and I saw he was sitting and learning Mishnayos, and he was drinking a glass of tea. And then the Rebbe, my father-in-law, told me that his father did not say Karban Pesach, say the Karban Pesach. He learned say the Karban Pesach. He actually would wear a gartel when he learned this, and he would do it standing. The Rebbe talks about us preparing for bringing the Karban Pesach. Part of preparing for bringing the Karban Pesach is learning the halachas. And where do we start learning the halachas? Starting from the Siddur. The Siddur is printed for everyone, so that's one good place to start learning the Seder Karban Pesach. After saying more correctly, learning Karban Pesach, the Friedrich Rebbe writes that would normally take, by the Rebbe Rashab, an hour or maybe an hour and a half, that it would be a new lichtigkeit, the house would be lit up. It was so uvgelegt, so happy. Everything was nice. Everything was beautiful. It was a motivating attitude of a feeling, of a mood, of a spirit of Erev Pesach after learning about Karban Pesach. It wasn't preparation to Yom Tov. It was Yom Tov. There was the hope of Bias HaMashiach was very strong there. We felt that Mashiach is coming any moment, and there's going to be the Beis HaMikdash, and we're going to bring the Karban Pesach. And we are involved in such pleasure with this. This was different than Simchas Torah, different than Yutas Kislev of Erev Pesach. It was a big, happy, uplifted spirit. We felt the feeling from every corner, the Geula, the Leil Shemurim, the Geula smell from everything. In one moment, there's going to be something that we heard about for so many years, and that belongs to us, the idea of Karban Pesach. You're supposed to read it, say the Karban Pesach in the right time, and when you're reading it, should be like bringing the Karban and think about the Beis HaMikdash. The Rebbe says that when we say the Karban Pesach, it's more than just reading about Karbanos. It's more than about learning. Anytime when we learn about our Karban, we say about our Karban, we say Karbanos in davening, we say Ezem Mukayim, this is much more. It's as if we're actually in the Beis HaMikdash and doing all the acts of the Karban Pesach. When we're saying, we're actually sacrificing it. Now, you don't have to say it in the exact time when they brought the Karban Pesach. As long as in a time when the Karban Pesach was kosher, it's fine. So really, we said before you should say it before sunset, but if you didn't manage till sunset, there might be room, according to certain opinions, till nightfall to take it shech the Karban Pesach, or at least sprinkle the blood. So do it after sunset. On Yom Tov, we're not allowed to light a new fire, because lighting a fire is a form of a malacha. You're creating something new, and it's something that could have been done before Yom Tov. So you can't create a new fire on Yom Tov. Therefore, Erev Pesach, Erev Yom Tov, you're supposed to always make sure you have light, fire in your house. You could use fire on the gas, so you should be able to carry flame when you want to light candles. When it comes to second night Pesach, and you want to light candles. When you want to light candles Erev Shabbos, which is the second day Pesach, Erev Shabbos Chol Hamoed, you should have fire there. People who have a yard site and they want to light a neshama licht, best to prepare the neshama licht on Erev Yom Tov already, and neshama licht burns for a few days, because there are opinions that say they're not allowed to light a neshama licht, that you don't have any benefit from it, unless you're putting it by the place of the meal and becoming part of the regular candles, or it's put in the shul by the amid, by the chazan. But otherwise, some people say you can't use a neshama licht. People who set the Shabbos clock should make sure they set it, that the time should work for both days Yom Tov and for Shabbos. And I should mention a safety issue. If you're leaving your gas open for a few days, make sure there's open, there's open air current, a window open, a 4-inch window open, that make sure that your carbon dioxide detector is working. These are things that you have to be careful about. People who use the neronim, these glass neronim, sometimes what happens is the candle stick to it and you want to light candles. The next night you have a problem. So what you could do, you could put a tiny bit of water, a little bit, not a lot. A lot is a problem, halachically also. A little bit of water or oil on Erev Yom Tov. This will help that actually the disc on the bottom won't stick to it. Before Yom Tov comes in, check your clothing, make sure it doesn't have any muktzah. Give tzedakah for the 2 days Yom Tov and for Shabbos, because you can't give tzedakah on Thursday or on Friday or on Shabbos. And get ready for lighting the candles. We light candles first, then we make a bracha, the same way we do on Shabbos, and we make a bracha lahadik ner shel Yom Tov and a bracha shechiyanu. If somebody made a mistake, they forgot to say shechiyanu. There's a lot of halachas on Yom Tov. You have to do things differently. You might make a mistake. In the Pesach guide that we put out, which is supposed to come from the printer any day, there's a special chart for all the different types of mistakes that you can make. I don't want to go through with that in this class, not to confuse people and make them make more mistakes. This is about what you're supposed to do, not if you made mistakes. So if you did make a mistake, look in that Pesach guide. The time for lighting Yom Tov candles, you're not supposed to light it on Yom Tov, you're supposed to light it Erev Yom Tov, the same way we do with Erev Shabbos. So the time Erev Yom Tov is 7:02. That's for those who do 18 minutes before sunset. Ideally, could even do even earlier. If somebody did not do that, then they're allowed to light on Yom Tov, but make sure you're lighting from an existing flame. Comes Ma'ariv, the night of the Seder. We start Shir Amalis, we have a Ma'ariv. And again, people can make mistakes in their Ma'ariv. We have a special chart for that, as mentioned earlier. The Arizal writes that Shabbos and Yom Tov are very different than the night of Pesach. Or phrase it differently. The night of Pesach, the Ma'ariv, is very different than every other Shabbos and Yom Tov. Usually we ascend from one world to another world, one level and another level, then another level. Every tefillah we go up a level. The night of Pesach, when we daven Ma'ariv, we go up all the levels all at once. When we're davening this Ma'ariv, we have to have proper kavanah. There's great stuff that are happening when we're davening this Ma'ariv. And following Ma'ariv, this howl which is said b'tzibur. It said stavka should be said b'tzibur. It's said with a special pleasantness. It says b'ne'ima. We make a bracha before the howl and haluch at the end of howl. After Ma'ariv, the first night of Pesach, and the same the second night. Those who don't have a minyan should still say bi'chidus with a bracha. Ladies may also make a bracha on this howl. Some don't say howl, but if those who say can make a bracha. If a person did not say howl at Ma'ariv and they remember, then it's still before Kiddush. You should say it before Kiddush. In the Seder there's howl, but if you didn't say the howl before Ma'ariv and you remembered after the Haggadah, say it after the Seder. Don't make a bracha anymore. That's not the time to make the bracha is only if you did it earlier before Kiddush. But you'll say it again, but without a bracha. We leave shul, we wish each other a good Yom Tov. The Rebbe once wished when he came to visit the Seder, Kashem Pesach and Pesach. Both are good brachas. We should have both a good Yom Tov and a Kashem Pesach and Pesach. And for those who didn't do Kiddush Levana, so Kiddush Levana is not supposed to be done on Yom Tov. But if you didn't manage yet to do Kiddush Levana, you could do it on Yom Tov. Try to do it before Ma'ariv. You say the regular Kiddush Levana with all the psukim. Before we start the Seder night, I want to talk about carrying on Yom Tov. And there's sometimes carrying there's carrying that's involved to get to the Seder. The halach is you're allowed to carry from one possession to another, from one area to another area on Yom Tov, but that doesn't mean you can carry whatever you want. You're only allowed to carry things that you need, that you need for that day. Something that you're going to need for the following day, you're not allowed to carry on Yom Tov. If you finish using something and you want to bring it back to the place you took it from, so you were by a Seder and you want to bring back the Haggadah. So Chazal there's a special called Hitiru Seifa Mishun Tchilasan. They allowed you, if there's a concern, if we're not going to let you bring back the Haggadah, you would not bring it to begin with, because if I can't bring back my Haggadah, I might get lost. I don't know, this is not a safe place. Then you're allowed to bring it back also, even though you don't need it anymore. But if there's a safe place over there, then you're not allowed to carry it back afterwards. You're certainly not allowed to carry it for the next day. You want to carry a talus. I don't talk about the daytime, but let's talk about carrying and mention all the halachas. You want to carry a talus from your house to shul. So you're allowed to carry your talus from your house to shul. You're allowed to bring it back also. But if you have a place in the shul that you could keep it, you have a locker, you have a safe place, you have a place where you know it's not going to get lost, not going to get stolen, then you're not allowed to carry it. You don't need to take it back home. Furthermore, some say that Yom Tov, when you're leaving shul, since you don't need the talus anymore, and you could technically wear your talus, so why should you carry it? There's no need to carry it in your hands. So best would be if a Baal Nefesh, a God-fearing person, should be stringent and not carry the talus in their hand. And some people are machmer even on the way to shul, even though now you actually need it, but you could wear it. So why should you hold it in your hand? There was the Friedrich Rebbe once saw one of our Nash members walking on Yom Tov to shul and holding his talus, and he told him, "Das pass for Shmuel Yankiv." There's a guy called Shmuel Yankiv. For him, it makes sense. For you, pasnish, you should carry your talus on Yom Tov. The Rebbeim would often comment to people that are carrying the talus in their hand on Yom Tov. So it's not appropriate. It seems like it wasn't mamish aser, but the right thing, it's not appropriate for Yom Tov if you could really technically wear it. There are those that say that a key holder that has a couple of keys and you don't need all the keys for Yom Tov, you could only carry those keys you need. There's a machlekes about that, but I'm just putting that out there as an example of things that if you don't need it, it's questionable if you're allowed to carry. It's a mitzvah to start a Seder as soon as possible because we don't want the kids to fall asleep by the Seder. You can't start the Seder until it's mamish dark, till it's nighttime, which is 7:52 over here in New York. In Shulchan Aruch, it's brought down that that there's a minhag to give out to the children nuts, sweets before the Seder. They should ask why we're giving all of a sudden nash. Then they're going to ask questions. We don't have a good answer for that question, but once we get them in a mode of asking questions, so we keep them awake for the Seder. The Rebbe once said that he's surprised that even though it says in Shulchan Aruch, nobody does this. So I don't know if the Rebbe was saying you should do it or you shouldn't do it. It seems like more implying you should do it, but try to do whatever you can to keep them awake and in a positive way, as we see from this halacha. We start the Seder with setting up the kaira. By the Rebbe's table, the Friedrich Rebbe's table, by the Rabbeim's table, the Rebbe writes, the members of the family, when they put down the matzahs, they didn't have a bowl, they didn't have a kaira, a plate. They put it on the cloth. The only one that had a plate was the Rebbe, who had a silver tray. The Rebbe comments on this minhag that in the Rebbe's house, in the Rabbeim's household, that was the custom, that this is only for by the Rebbe's table. If you're anywhere else in your own house, you really should have. The Rebbe wanted people, yes, to have a Seder plate. The Seder Lepakaira is part of the set. It's supposed to be 10 different items, 3 matzahs, 6 foods, and a bowl, a plate which completes it all. That's the level of Malchus. So really, everybody else should have a kaira. Those who did not manage, forgot, for whatever reason, they didn't prepare all the items that they need for the Seder. Some of the items are problematic to prepare them on Yom Tov in a way that's permissible on Yom Tov. First of all, you can only not prepare whatever you need for the first night. You can't prepare from one day for the next day. Unless you're doing it in one act, not a different act. So when you're doing in one hachana, it requires one activity, then you're allowed to. It's not considered that you're preparing for the second day. Besides, there's a few couple of halachas that are different when you're doing it on Yom Tov before Yom Tov, which is why it's important to do it before Yom Tov. We're not going to go through everything. I'm just going to mention, for example, roasting the zraya. So you only allowed to roast the zraya that you need for that night. You have to make sure that the flesh, the meat will be eaten. We try to take up as much as meat, the flesh. We take up as much from the bones of the zraya, but it has to be eaten, because if it's not going to be eaten, then you're doing something on Yom Tov which is not for the purpose of Yom Tov. Generally, we don't eat the zraya normally because we don't want to look like a carbon Pesach. But the halacha of doing malacha on Yom Tov, you can only do it if it's going to eat it on Yom Tov. And you can't eat it by night because it's roasted. So you can only eat it by day. Some people wouldn't even eat the zraya even if it's cooked, because it looks like the current pace. They want to eat by night, they'll eat it by day. But these are things you have to be conscious of. As mentioned, this is whether you prepared it before, you didn't prepare it before, even those that prepared it for should be conscious of the fact that our custom is we take off almost all the flesh. We leave a tiny bit of flesh. If there's no chicken or meat on it, it's not considered a cooked food. The zraya is supposed to be a cooked food, and the egg, 2 cooked foods corresponding to Karban Pesach and Karban Chagiga. So if the zraya is only bones, it doesn't count. So we take off almost all the meat, leave a tiny bit of it. Mar, if you didn't grate your charein horseradish before Yom Tov, you can't grate horseradish in Yom Tov. You could cut up into small pieces with a knife, or take lettuce, which is pre-checked. Charoises you're allowed to prepare on Yom Tov. Salt water you're allowed to prepare on Yom Tov. You don't have to make any shinui. Matzahs, I mentioned earlier, you should check your matzahs before Yom Tov, make sure there's nothing doubled, no kafulas, and the fuch is doubled and blown up. If you forgot, it's not a problem of better to remove them on Yom Tov or on Shabbos. Put them aside, because if it is anything which has that kful on the fuch, it's a question of chametz. Put it aside; it'll be burnt after Yom Tov. You're allowed to separate whole matzah from broken matzah. That's not a problem. When people setting up the seder, they often have a problem with lechem mishnah. Some matzahs come broken. I wonder why. Now you're looking for lechem mishnah, and you have a matzah that's partially burnt in a way that's inedible. So if it's totally inedible, it's as if it was cut. But if it's edible, then even though if it's partially burnt, it could be joined. If a person is desperate, then they could even use the one that's burnt in a way that's inedible. Going back to the kfulas and the fuchas, I'm going back, sorry, I didn't mention this earlier. If it's not a real kfula and a fucha, it's just some people are stringent, they want to treat this as if it's a double, the blown up matzah, you let it move on a Shabbos Yom Tov, it's not muktzah. And same, in the matzah, parts of it are edible on Pesach, and parts of it are not, you let it move the rest. Once you started moving it, you let it continue moving it. So it is, if it's usher, it's muktzah, but very often you already have it in your hand, or part of it is edible, or it's not really mamashas, it's only a chumrah. I'm going back to the lechem mishnah idea. If a person doesn't have whole matzah of lechem mishnah, there are those that say that a matzah that is missing only 1/48th of the matzah is missing, it's still considered whole. Sometimes it's so broken it's missing even that. So there are those that say that a whole matzah and a half matzah is considered two. But some people don't even have whole matzahs. They have no whole matzahs. So they'll take two broken pieces for lechem mishnah for lack of any other choice. Of course, you should have two whole matzahs completely. What some people go and do is they take the matzah, the broken matzah, and they go and burn it on Yom Tov, and like that they're going to make it into a shleim, into a whole matzah for lechem mishnah. Now that's a problem because if we can, it could be considered fixing an item on Yom Tov, which you're not doing Yom Tov, even though it's for food purposes. Also, this is something that could have been done before Yom Tov. Sometimes when you're doing that, it starts catching a fire, you have to extinguish it, and you can't extinguish it Yom Tov. Shabbos is even worse. There are those that say, B'chlal, this doesn't count for lechem mishnah, it was baked already. It was baked. Why are you baking it again now? And even after you burn it, doesn't look like it's whole, so maybe it wouldn't count for lechem mishnah. It's not edible. But if a person is really stuck and he has no other matzah, so at least it looks better when it was burnt. It's definitely better. And especially when sometimes people, anyhow, it's a normal thing to rebake matzahs because you want to have a better taste. So there's room for leniency if your person is stuck and desperate and has no other situation, no other choice. When we come to set up the table, the seder I mentioned already earlier that you shouldn't cut from a roll of plastic. You're not allowed to cut plastic to make places, to make a plastic tablecloth for the table. Even if it's larger than how much you need, that's considered mechatach, cutting. It's considered masak and mana, making a keli. When it's coming from a roll, it's considered mamish like making a keli. You're not allowed to do that. So make your plastic, show your plastic tablecloths all cut in advance. It is our minig from generation after generation that the first seder we start right after Magriv. We don't have a long seder. We want to eat Afrikaim before midnight. The second seder we start late, and the Rabbeim would speak a long time about the Haggadah and about Torah and about the Avodas Hashem. That markedly different the first seder and the second seder. Before we do anything on these two nights of Pesach, we're supposed to look in the Siddur or look in the Haggadah and know exactly what we're supposed to be doing. We would notice the Rebbe when he would go to the Seder, he would always open the Haggadah and read the words in the Haggadah, the instructions, Kadesh, Urchatz, and next to each word, it says in Hebrew what should be done. He would actually read those words to himself, verbalize those words. Before Karpas, the Rebbe would read Urchatz and Karpas. Before Rachza, washing the hand the second time, the Rebbe would read Rachza, might see Matzah, Marer, Kodesh, because you're not supposed to talk until after Kodesh, so he would read that all in advance. So it's important to follow instructions that are in the Siddur. Because you're supposed to be looking the night of Pesach always into your Haggadah to know what to do, and Baruch Hashem, everybody has a Haggadah, and there's English Haggadahs, so we're not going to go through all the details of the night of the Seder. There's so much to go through. Everything is found in the Haggadah Shel Pesach. We have the Rebbe's Haggadah with a lot of details, but I'm going through a few things that people don't notice. There's some changes in the Chabad minute compared to what it says in the Haggadah. Some of the more modern, contemporary Chabad Haggadahs have this update, but in the actual words of the Alter Rebbe, it says differently. For example, the Alter Rebbe says that you dip the karpas in vinegar, we dip it in salt water. It's mentioned that when you're making a boire pri adam on the karpas, you should have in mind Lemara, we should also have in mind the koirach. It's mentioned that by Magid we pick up the Seder plate. We don't do that. We just uncover the matzahs. The Rebbe once spoke about this, and he said that our Rabbeim job is to connect with everyone and to spread the wellsprings all the way outward. It doesn't make sense that to pick up the Seder plate and leave the table all the way on the bottom. We need to go to those that are on the bottom. So therefore, we don't lift up our Seder plate. We just uncover some of the matzahs. It says in the Haggadah that after Heilach Ma'ani, we move the kain to the other side of the table. We don't do that. We move it a tiny bit and we cover the matzahs. By Vihisha Amd, it says to pick up your cup and then cover the matzahs. No, you're supposed to do the other way around. It's not trying to say the order. First, you're always supposed to, if you're going to pick up the cup, before you pick up the cup, you cover the matzahs first. Matzah zu marzeh, or matzah zoi marzeh. It says take the matzah the mari hand. We don't take it. We put our hand on it. We don't actually take it into our hand. We threw the cloth on it. We put our hands on top of it. In the Haggadah, it says, "Fam lefichach, pick up your cup until the end of Asher Ga'alanu." In the updated Haggadah, it's in the Rebbe's Haggadah at the bottom. It's not in the actual words of the Alter Rebbe. It says, "We hold her until the name of the fun of Hallelujah." We put it down for Hallel, and we pick it up when we come to Beracha Asher Ga'alanu. The charoises is mixed with wine, so we don't actually put wine into it. We have dry charoises on the table. Right before we're about to dip in the murder and the charoises, we take some of the charoises and we put into the saucer that's underneath the kiddush cup, and there's a bit of wine in there. We dip the murder in there, where the charoises is. When we say a bracha of the murder, we have in mind to exempt the koirach. Koirach we do not dip into charoises because we're concerned that the charoises has wine in it and wine is wet and it'll go on the matzahs. We take some of the leftover dry charoises that we have on the kaira. Some of the charoises we put into the wine in our saucer underneath the kiddush cup. Some of the charoises is left on the seder plate, and we put a tiny bit of dry charoises in the murder and then we shake it off. Again, this doesn't say in the Alter Rebbe Siddur. In the Haggadah it says by tzafan afikoim we should eat one kazais, and the custom is to eat two kazaisim of matzah, for the Korban Pesach and for the matzah that was eaten with the Korban Pesach. And even though it says in the Haggadah that we eat afikoim before midnight, the second night we're not particular about that. So these are things, I'm just mentioning a few things that are slightly different. You can listen again to this just to recall and know what to do. There are many mitzvahs we're going to do by the Seder. There are mitzvahs that are minat Torah, mitzvahs that are rabbinical mitzvahs. Story of saying the story of coming out of Egypt is a mitzvah from the Torah. Eating a matzah the first night is a mitzvah from the Torah. Excuse me. We want to do all those mitzvahs properly. We're going to go through a bit of the details about these mitzvahs, how to make sure to do these mitzvahs properly. First of all, there are measurements for each thing, and it's a good idea to add a bit to the minimum measurement to make sure you don't make any mistakes. It's also, the measurement is about what's going into your mouth, what you're absorbing, what you're swallowing. Sometimes some of the wine pours out, some pieces of matzah stay stuck between your teeth. These things are not included. And actually, with the wine, since people recline when they eat the wine, when they drink the wine, often some wine spills out. So you could actually taste a tiny bit before you recline, so you'll have enough and drink the rest when you're reclining. What's the measurement of matzah? Every one of the 4 cups of wine, you have to have a revius, a quarter of a lug. A revius means a quarter. A lug is a measurement which is, a lug is the volume of 6 eggs. A revius is a quarter of that, is an egg and a half. We'll talk soon specific details of those measurements. You're supposed to drink the minimum amount. But you're supposed to drink. The meaning is that we drink the whole entire cup, and we drink it all in one go. If you can't drink the whole cup, you should drink the majority of the cup. The last cup of the 4 cups of wine, you're supposed to drink a full revius because you're supposed to be able to make ala gefna bracha achrona. If a person can't drink it all in one go and he stopped a few times in the middle, it's okay, as long as he's not stopping more than the amount of time that takes normally for a person to drink a revius. So if it's taking way too much time, then that's a problem. If a person took more time, he should really drink it again, but without a bracha. The last 2 cups, we're particularly not to drink wine between the first cup and the second cup, you're not supposed to drink wine unless you had a mind you're going to drink wine. Between the second and the third cup, you're allowed to drink more wine. After the third cup, you're not allowed to drink more wine, only the 4th cup. And after the 4th cup, certainly you're not allowed to drink anything else. So we're making a marked distinction in your behavior between the first 2 cups and the last 2 cups. In the first 2 cups, there's room to be machmer. If you waited some time, you paused, drink another cup. If you had a mind between the first cup and the second cup that you could have more wine, okay, so you'll drink another cup. After the second cup, you anyhow let him drink more. The third cup, unless you waited the amount of time which is called more than achilas pras, which is minimum level, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 7 minutes, so that's way too much time to drink a cup of wine, then you have to drink it over. Karpas was supposed to have a very small amount. It was supposed to have less than a kazais. Kazais in this case is about the volume of a third of an egg, a tiny, very tiny piece of karpas. Moitzi matzah is supposed to have two kazaisim. The kazais of the top matzah and the kazais of the middle matzah. Those who don't have a kaira, don't have their own matzahs. People who just by the table are just eating some of the matzah, they don't have their own. So there's no reason for them to have two kazaisim. Someone who's old, someone who's sick, and he can't eat just one kazais will do the job. And if I'm talking about someone who has a hard time eating matzah, if they can't eat dry matzah, they could crumb up the matzah like flour as long as they're eating a kazais. If they can't even swallow that, they could put a tiny bit of water to help them swallow. Put a bit of water in their mouth. If they have no choice, they could even soak it in water. We don't soak matzah in water, but that's important to be mekayim the mitzvah of matzah. They shouldn't use hot water. Put in a tiny bit of time right before eating it and take it out right away. Not fruit juice, specifically water. That's in order to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah the night of the Seder. For the rest of Yom Tov, it's better to put it in a fruit juice and not in water because we're worried wet matzah is more serious when it's water than when it's fruit juice. But for the Seder, better to put it in water. There's a mitzvah to eat mutter, a kazayis of mutter. Our customers, we use both lettuce and horseradish. The Rebbe took a kazayis of each. So, strictly speaking, that's not required. There's koirich, we take one kazayis of matzah, one kazayis of mutter. Afikoyim, we take two kazaysim. But the Rebbe writes if somebody has a hard time eating two kazaysim of afikoyim, one is for the Karban Pesach and one is for the matzah that was eaten with the Karban Pesach, he could eat one kazayis and have in mind the kazayis should commemorate either the matzah with the Karban Pesach or the Karban Pesach. So I said so many times the word kazayis. What is a kazayis? All the volumes of measurements of the Torah are volume, not weight. We often use weight measurements because it's easy for people to understand, but the measurements of the Torah are volume. So, for example, if you fill up the volume of a kazayis and you fill it with water, or if you fill it with matzah, matzah will weigh less. So it's not actually, you can't measure everything the same. There's different ways how to measure a kazayis. It's either the volume of an average size egg. Think of egg in your mind and think how much matzah fills up an average size egg, half of that. That's the shear for kazayis min ha-Torah. For kazayis min ha-Rabbanan, it's not a half egg, it's a third of an egg. So when it comes to mutter, we use a smaller kazayis. When it comes to koirich, we use a smaller kazayis. When it comes to afikoyim, we use a small kazayis. When it comes to the two kazayis of matzah, if you're eating only one, you need to use the bigger kazayis. If you're eating two kazayis for matzah, then you could take each one a smaller amount. Either way, people think about all these measurements. When you're washing and you're making a bracha al natilas yadayim, you're always supposed to eat the shear of a kabeah, the size of an egg, in order to say al natilas yadayim. That applies a whole year. And whenever you eat each kazayis of this egg in the amount of time called kadeh chilus within a few minutes. So, and that's relevant, like I said, a whole year. It's very hard for me to give measurements for a kazayis because every matzah is different, but I would say the big kazayis is approximately, give or take, and the give or take is sincere. You really should give or take, is approximately a quarter of a matzah for today's day and age based on measurements and the matzahs that we have. And the small kazayis is about a sixth of a matzah. It's less than what people think. I said you have to eat this all at a time called kedei achilas. You don't have to swallow it all in one go. I know it is brought on a poskim, but then it's not the custom. We don't swallow the matzah all in one go. It's practically impossible. But we have to eat it in a certain time called kedei achilas pras. There's different opinions, starting from 3 minutes upwards. Some people say 4 minutes. Is more lenient opinion at 6 minutes. The Rebbe writes it's best to be chayshish for the opinion that it's within 3 minutes. But that means not the chewing. That means the swallowing. The swallowing of the matzah, which is not hard to accomplish. People say that they saw that I'm eating matzah, and it took them a very long time. It took them about 40 minutes to finish eating the matzah. So the swallowing is happening all in one go. So don't swallow. You swallow it all eventually. When I'm talking about the shear of the revius for the wine, for the kiddush, halacha tells us how to measure with fingers, with thumbs. So 2 thumbs length, 2 thumbs width, and a certain height. It's approximately the volume of an egg and a half. The different measurements starting from, it's about 3 ounces, starting from 2.9 ounces to 3.5 ounces. It's always better to get the higher amount, but if you can't, you take a smaller amount, a smaller becher. Wine. The wine should be red wine, ideally. You could mix red wine into the white wine. You're allowed to do that on Yom Tov, but some people particularly put the white into the red, not the red into the white, so it shouldn't look like coloring on Yom Tov. Try to get wine that's 5% alcohol, if not 5%, at least 4% or 3% alcohol. If you can't even do that, you can drink grape juice. And a lot of people do. It's a good idea to mix a tiny bit of wine. At least the wine should be a sixth of the mixture, a tiny bit of wine into the grape juice. If you mix water into wine or grape juice, even if the water is a majority, you would really still make a better priagaf. And if it's still drinkable, people would normally drink this as wine, if it's normal to do it like that. You certainly can't have 6 times water compared to the amount of wine that you have there, and you will not make better priagaf of that. We ideally should not even have 3 times water, 75% being water. But I will point out that some of the companies already mixed wine before, so you might not be able to mix any wine. What did the Rav once say? He was asked how much water you allowed to mix into the wine. He said, whatever you allowed, the company already did. It's not always 100% like that, but if it's people that are buying these strong wines or people that make their own wine, they could definitely add water to it if it's still suitable to be drunk as wine. If somebody can't drink wine or grape juice, and for medical reasons, he needs to drink something else. He could drink what we call chamar medina, local beverage. It could be hot coffee or tea. In the Seder, there's different times we need to recline. We need to recline when we drink the 4 cups of wine, matzah, koirech, and afikomen. I don't mean we make the bracha on it. By the bracha, you're not supposed to recline when we're eating and drinking. This applies to men. The women, the customers, they don't recline. If a person didn't recline, it becomes a difference. If he forgot, there's a difference what? In the dalet kaisis, depends which cup. After the second cup, you're allowed to drink more wine, so drink it again, ba'aseva. After the third and fourth, you're not allowed to drink again, so no, don't drink it again reclining. After the first cup, technically you're allowed to drink more wine, but it's not the custom to drink more wine. So if you had a mind, and you should have a mind before you drink the first cup of wine, that if I forget to recline, I should be able to drink another cup. You should have that in mind, and then you'll be able to drink another cup. Matzah, if you forgot to recline, you should eat another kazais reclining. Koirich, you don't have to eat again. After coming, you don't have to eat again. When I talk about reclining, that's about reclining. Sitting, you need to sit. Even those who don't have to recline should sit when they're eating the matzah, the dal koises. It should not be done while you're standing. How the reclining happens when you swallow, okay? Not when you're chewing. You have to make sure, you definitely have to make sure when you're swallowing, you're reclining. How do you recline? Reclining needs to be done on something, like the way kings eat. They recline somewhat. They move their head and most of their body and have it leaning on blankets or pillows, not on the ear. It's supposed to be on something on the left side, leaning in such a way that if you take that out of the way, they will fall. On the left side applies to right-handed people or left-handed people. If they don't have anything to lean on, they don't have blankets, they could lean on the chair, on the handle on the side of the chair. You could lean on someone else also. You can't lean on yourself. The Rebbe Rashab told the Friedrich Rebbe the following words: Yosef Yitzchak, medaf trachten b'meshech haseder. We always have to think during the seder. You think about Zayin Mensch. If you think about being a mensch, Hashem will help. Especially you should think that when you open the door. Don't ask for Gashmias, ask for Ruchnias. Ask for spiritual things. The Friedrich Rebbe related this to the Rebbe, and he told the Rebbe, I don't want people to know that I told you this. Our Rebbe went and publicized this in the Rebbe's Haggadah, even though he was personally told he doesn't want, Friedrich Rebbe told me he doesn't want people to know that he told him this. And I will mention, talking about the Rebbe's Haggadah, this year marks 80 years from when the Rebbe published the Haggadah. It's a good time to renew our commitment to learn the Rebbe's Haggadah. The Shalah writes that the Kedusha of this night of Pesach is very, very holy. We should be careful this night not to talk any mundane matters. Talk to the family about this. They should always be connected to Hashem throughout the night. Only be involved in the mitzvahs of the night, the stories of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and publicize these stories. Sfarim write, you should have to act in the free way. Don't be worried. Don't get upset about anything. Try to make sure everything is peaceful, and don't let the Yetzer Hara come in and the Satan come in. Going to the actual Seder, through the Seder. Before we take the first cup of wine, you're supposed to rinse it from the inside and from outside. And we should rinse the cup again before benching. Kiddush, you could hear the Kiddush on the Haggadah from the owner of the house, but everybody has to drink their own cups of wine. When you're hearing Kiddush from someone else, you have to hear every single word. And the minig is that everybody says along the Kiddush because it's hard to actually hear every single word. We make the Kiddush, make a Ber Priya Gafen, make a Kaddish Yisrael Vazman and a Shechiyanu, the shechianu also covers the shechianu for b'dikas chametz. If a lady made shechianu during lichbenshur, she doesn't make shechianu again now. A lot of people ask after kiddush, can I drink water now? You're allowed to drink water, and the bracha on the wine will cover the water if the water was there when you made the ber pregafen you had in mind. And the water will also be covered later with ala gefen. You shouldn't be drinking the other drinks. There's a particular problem with drinks that are a local beverage. If you would have to make a bracha, it's almost like adding another kos. So stick to water. We wash our hands or chatz the same way we wash our bread. We just don't make a bracha. If a person forgot and made a bracha, so as mentioned, I'm not going to go into details of people make mistakes. We have that in the chart in the back of the guide, so look there for that. We shouldn't make any interruptions, same as with bread, between urchatz and karpas after we washed our hands. With karpas, we take a small piece of onion, we dip it in our hand. It's best not to use a spoon or fork because you want to be able to make sure that you dip it in your hand and you're required to wash. Dip it in salt water, you eat it, make a bracha, you eat it without reclining. There's a halacha on Shabbos that anything that salt changes its nature, like an onion, once you salted it, it's almost like tanning it, it improves it. So you're not allowed to do that unless you're doing it right before the meal. So if you're doing two pieces, it's a problem because when you put down two pieces and you dip them in salt, by the time you're eating the second one, you eat the first, but the second one, meanwhile, is being delayed and being in salt. So you're supposed to dip a piece and then eat it. Some people hold this applies in Yom Tov also, because you could have done this. Why, even though Yom Tov, you're allowed to do anything they need for food, but who says you have to do two at once? You can do one at a time. And there might be some people suggest this problem might be with salt water also. And then we should be machma and dip only one at a time if you can. And there's really nothing that you'll lose if you'll dip one piece of the onion at a time. And salt water, you should do that. I mentioned that karpas eat less than a kazais. If a person ate a kazais, he still shouldn't say a burn nefashis. In the Haggadah, as mentioned, you can really technically hear the whole Haggadah from the person reading the Haggadah. It is hard to do that. So the custom is everybody says their own Haggadah quietly. Make sure you hear it's audible to your ears. Make sure your lips move, but quietly, not to disturb everybody else. And one person says the Haggadah loud. The reason for that is because it's hard to listen to the person saying the Haggadah. You might lose focus, you might not hear, you might not have kavanah, and you might not be yotzei. The Zohar says if somebody says the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim and he rejoices, you're supposed to say the story of the Haggadah with simcha. You will eventually rejoice with the Shekhinah of the world to come. Hashem will gather together all his Pamal Yishal Ma'al, all his whole group above, and tell them, listen to my praise. My children are rejoicing in the my story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. We are trying to get to Moitzi Matzah before midnight. So we shouldn't take too much time in the Haggadah. We can still say the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim after we eat. The Frierdiker Rebbe says, Erev Pesach, everything was rushed but calm. Until we started saying the Haggadah. When we started saying Haggadah, we didn't rush, but we still didn't overextend it because we wanted to get to Matzah and Afikoyim before midnight. If there's a great need, you're allowed to stop and talk in the middle of the Haggadah, but you're not supposed to stop and talk Sichas Chulin and Dvarim B'Teilim Chas Hashem mundane matters. Only something which is necessary for the meal and necessary for the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. The Rabbeim were particular that they would not explain the Haggadah, even explaining the Haggadah from after the part of Lefichach. And likewise, in the second half of the Haggadah, after benching, from Hal onwards, they wouldn't give interpretations of the Haggadah. So interpretations are fine until Lefichach. When saying the Haggadah, you're supposed to understand what you're saying. If you don't understand what you're saying, you're not fulfilling the story of the Haggadah. It's not called relating the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim means to understand. So if somebody doesn't understand, read the translation. Don't look later, because if you're looking later at while you're eating, you're looking over again the Haggadah, that's not called, when you said he didn't understand what you were saying. When you're saying the Haggadah for other people who don't understand what's going on, explain to them what's going on. At least the critical parts of the Haggadah. So the people that we have often could read English, so we don't have to explain to them. They can see and read it themselves and they'll understand. Hallel onwards, they don't have to understand, but until Hallel, they have to understand what's being said. Haggadah is supposed to be said on matzah, so you're supposed to have some of the matzah visible until you get to Lefichach, where we cover the matzah. We're going to be pouring by the 10 makkos, we're going to be pouring into a broken dish. It doesn't have to be an obvious break. It could be even a plastic cup, plastic bowl that's thrown out, that's just made for a one-time use. It could be a dish that you never use. The idea of a broken dish meaning something that's not made for usage. We don't put this broken dish on the table, and we don't even pass it over the table. And the drops of wine that we pour in there, we pour in a place that people will not step there. Matzah, as mentioned a few times already, should be eaten before midnight, like the Carbon Pesach. This is a mitzvah same in Torah, and the poskim that hold that you're not yoitza, the mitzvah of matzah, after midnight. In fact, if it's after midnight, there's a question if you can make a bracha al achilas matzah. Because it's a question, you should not make a bracha safek brachas lahakol. If you're going to be eating matzah after midnight, don't say the bracha al achilas matzah first night and second night. Afikoyman will lean the second night, but not mitzi matzah. Matzah should be eaten with appetite. The more appetite you have, the more hiddur mitzvah. We're supposed to enjoy the mitzvah. We're not supposed to push it down. You're supposed to eat it in a happy way or in fear of Hashem, true. And we eat it fast, but not rush. You eat it properly, regular speed, but not squeezing it all down. We don't dip the matzah in salt because of the preciousness of the mitzvah. Now, when people have the mitzi matzah, they want to give matzah for themselves and for the rest of the family. Once they wash, they have to start distributing matzah to everyone. And how do you do that? It becomes a big headache. The best way is if the owner of the house, the master of the house, the father usually washes his hands, makes lechem mishnah for everyone, eats his two kazesim, and after he finishes eating, he could start distributing to everybody else. Alternatively, before he washes, he gives out matzah to everyone, and then when he finished eating his two kazesim, he adds a tiny bit of matzah from the matzah that he had on the seder plate, from the top one and the middle one. There's a safety issue to eat burnt matzah. If they're overly black, they could be poisonous, so therefore you should be careful with that, even though people say they like it. The murder is supposed to be dipped in charesis. Some people forget the charesis part. If you didn't do it in murder, you'll rely that you'll do it during kodesh. If you didn't do it in kodesh, you can rely on the fact that you did it during murder. But if you didn't do it not in murder and not in kodesh, you were not makayim the whole mitzvah of charesis. Take a bit of murder, doesn't have to be kazayis. Dip it in charesis without a bracha, just to be makayim of charesis. Shulchan Aruch is a proper seder meal. We start off with an egg, and every Shabbos when you peel eggs, peels are muktzah. Peels have to go straight into the garbage. You can't put them on the table and then move them because it's muktzah. Either in the garbage or on a plate where you could check it out of the plate into the garbage. Or use a plastic plate which gets thrown straight into the garbage, but make sure there's already food in that plate because otherwise the plate becomes muktzah. When you're eating your meal at Shulchan Aruch, remember it is our custom. We don't eat anything that's part of the charosis and the murder, not apples, pears, or nuts, horseradish, any of these things until after the kodesh of the second night. If you're going to wash your hands during the meal or for mayim achronim, we don't put our hands on our lips like we do throughout the year for mayim achronim, throughout the entire Pesach, except for Ashal Pesach because of concerns of wet matzah. It is our custom we don't say l'chaim during the meal if we're going to be drinking wine, but not to make shouldn't look like we're adding to the four kaises. The Alter Rebbe writes in his Haggadah, they should be careful not to drink after Afikomen. The Rebbe explains the words "be careful not to drink" means make sure that you don't become thirsty. Drink before you get to that. Talking about drinking. So you shouldn't become thirsty later. Afikomen should be eaten before midnight, like the Carbon Pesach, the first night. And midnight in New York is 12:59. After Afikomen, we don't drink anything, not even water, and not the second night also. That is our minig. Before we bench, there used to be the minig that people would pour the kosher leo sometimes before benching, sometimes after benching. The Rebbe said in our generation, we always prepare and pour the kosher leo before benching, and then we bench. Sometimes it happens that some people throw up everything they ate by the Seder. Before benching, they threw up everything. If the person throws up, they don't bench. If you know for sure after you threw up there's still kazayis left in your system, or you ate till you are full and you still feel full, then you could bench a brichas hamazon. Now, what about matzah, mutter, dollar koises? You have to do that all over again? The big shaila. So, lamaisa, practically speaking, you only have to eat over the kazayis matzah. Even if you benched already, wash your hands again. Make al atilas yadayim. If you're eating the size of a kabeah, make hamoitzi. Don't make al achilas matzah and bench. Shvoich hamascha, we open all the doors between the room where the seder is and the street. And we say Shvech HaMascha, those who went to the door say it over there. The custom is we go with candles, not carrying oil or paraffin candles, liquid candles could be a problem. So you shouldn't go fast. That's might be considered extinguishing. You're not supposed to put the candle in a place where there's wind, even if the wind is currently not blowing. So make sure the candle is in a keli that the wind shouldn't get to it. In Shulchan Aruch it says that the whole entire night of Pesach you're supposed to talk about Pesach and about Yitzis Mitzrayim and the miracle that Hashem did us until you fall asleep. it's not hard to fall asleep the night of the Seder, but if somebody knows if they'll stay up, they won't be able to daven Shachris properly, they won't have koyach, better to go to sleep. Torah was not given for malachim. The Frierdiker Rebbe told us this night, this night we can receive so much, all the gates are open. Not the doors, the gates. So be conscious of that. When we're cleaning up from the Seder, we have the zroya left, don't throw it out. The zroya is chashuv. If you want to throw it in the garbage, be careful, it shouldn't be thrown in a disrespectful way. And talking about garbage is a common yont shayla, particularly after the Seder. Garbage is muktzah. Sometimes we have a halacha with today's ram graf shel rei. If something is disgusting and ugly and right in your place where you live, you let to move it, it's not muktzah. But even if you let to move it, what about carrying? So there's poskim that say that when you allow to carry yontiv, it's only if you want to carry something into another property, not if you want to take it out of this property. So if the smell really disturbs you, or you need a place where the garbage is because you need to put in more garbage, it's fine, you can take out the garbage. But if it's already out, you want to take it further out. You want it, it's not in a place where you're living. It's not in your house. It's outside. Especially if you want to take it out, that the garbage collectors come and get it. That's a problem on Yom Tov. After the Seder, we don't say the first night, we don't say the entire Shema, we don't say Shema until Visharech, we say Hamapel, we don't say anything else because it's a protected night. There are many other halachas of Pesach. There's on the first day, we come to Shul, we say Meir Datol, there's halachas about Meir Datol. The second night, we're going to be saying Sfira, there's halachas of Chol Hamoed, not everything is permissible on Chol Hamoed. A lot of that information is in the guide. Thank you for listening till now, and we should all have a kosher and freilich and Pesach, and to have the carbon Pesach with Mashiach Tzidkenu.